Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. You know, good television is part of a process that makes you, the viewer, feel like you're actually part of what's going on. So, for example, if you're watching that hot show, The Pit, you feel like you know each of those people, that there are protagonists and antagonists, there are people you're rooting for and people you're rooting against in that emergency room. You know that with movies that you watch, it draws you in and you feel connected. And I would argue it's even the same for things that are not about drama, but are more documentarian in nature. I start my morning every day by watching the Today Show. And part of the genius of the Today Show, like many other morning shows, is that the group of people who start your day off, get you going as that coffee kicks in, are people that feel like an extension of your family. When they make you laugh with them. Then they have challenge, you feel challenge. And that's what they do. For those of you who are young enough to remember, you might know that Walter Cronkite of blessed memory was known as the most trusted person in America because people felt that when he told you the news, it was a sense of truth. And that's what good television does. So I personally felt horrible, heartsick, when I heard weeks ago that Nancy Guthrie, a woman I never knew of before, never met in my entire life, was abducted in the middle of the night from her home in Arizona. I never met Savannah Guthrie, but she gives me the news every morning for at least the last decade. And as a result of it, I felt like I knew her. I knew her husband, I knew her family, I knew her kids, I knew what made her tick, I knew a little bit about her life. And to know that she was going through this trauma was painful to me, the viewer. And I don't think that was unique to David Kirshner. I think that's exactly how most people felt who watched the Today Show regularly. And sadly, most of us believe that Nancy Guthrie was abducted because of her daughter's celebrity. We don't know that to be the truth for sure, but we believe that. We think that because it's not really a phenomenon in America that 84-year-old women are taken from their homes without any information. It doesn't happen very regularly. It's been a sad time for this process, and my prayers are with the Guthrie family. I believe in miracles. It was David Ben-Gurion who said, "If you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist." And I believe in miracles, and I'm praying for a miracle for Savannah and for her family and for Nancy, that she will be reunited with them in health and in life. The family of NBC has been incredible during this moment, and they have given their empathy and support and focus to Savannah and to all of those as she goes through this really trying time. In fact, one of her very dear friends, Hoda Kotb, who had retired from television and journalism, came back to anchor the show in Savannah's absence so that she wouldn't feel any sense of pressure while she tends to the needs of her family, which I thought was gorgeous. A few weeks ago, all of the broadcasters, even those who were out on assignments as journalists, all of the anchors, they all started wearing yellow pins to advocate for finding Nancy Guthrie. And all of them are worn in a place so that the shot on TV shows them. So whether it's Craig Melvin, whether it's Hoda Kotb, you name it, the list goes on, Garrett Hake and so on, whether they're talking about the White House or they're talking about the war in Iran, all of these people from NBC are wearing these yellow ribbons. And they're on pins on their lapels, men and women. And the ribbons are these. These are the ribbons. I am pretty convinced, although I don't know for sure, that these ribbons were the same ribbons that were used when Israelis were abducted and being held hostage, and Jews around the country who were proud Zionists wore them on their lapel. I don't think they were made special for Savannah's family. I think they were the same ones that we no longer wear because all the hostages, dead and alive, are back home. And it got me thinking, what if Savannah's mom was abducted while there still were hostages being held in Gaza? Would the people on NBC still wear this ribbon? Because it might confuse them for not advocating for the finding or release or safe return of Nancy Guthrie. It might tell some people that they're advocating for Jews who were being held hostage against their will in Gaza. That would have been a tricky move for the executives over at NBC. How would they have handled that moment? Now, what's interesting also is that we're not supposed to feel a sense of victimhood jealousy. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you all that I don't feel it, but I do. I'm kind of annoyed, kind of upset, kind of mad. Not that all of NBC is wearing these yellow pins for Nancy, but I'm kind of mad that when dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people were abducted and held against their will, it would never enter theirs or anyone's mind at ABC, CBS, Al Jazeera, CNN, Fox, I-24. None of them were wearing the yellow ribbons. Why is it that some lives are worthy of wearing yellow ribbons for, but it seems that many Jewish lives aren't? On October 7th, there were multiple people in their 70s and 80s that were abducted and brought into Gaza. There's a well-known picture of a woman who was in her 80s. I believe her last name was Danzig, and she was put on a golf cart, and she was abducted into Gaza, held hostage against her will. But the world tore down posters of her. The world told us to take off our yellow pins. And I am pained and pretty troubled with why I can't advocate for the return of a Holocaust survivor taken from their sovereign home in Israel on a Saturday morning, but I can for a woman taken from her home in Arizona. Now, I want to be clear. I don't want anyone to misconstrue my words or what I'm trying to say here. I think we should be wearing pins for Nancy Guthrie, and I am literally heartsick that she has been taken and she hasn't been found. I want her to be returned, and I pray she can be returned in life to her family. And if, God forbid, she's not alive, I pray that her family can bury her and mourn her properly with the dignity and grace they deserve and she deserves. My question is not, why is Nancy getting this attention? My question is, why didn't we? Why was it denied to us? Why was another human told that their abduction doesn't fit in the same category just because of where they live or how they worship? And in a strange way, it's created this sense of envy in me, where I become jealous of other people's backgrounds and religions because of how it is that others can empathize with them and for them. Yet, on those 10 commandments behind me, we're reminded not to be jealous. And I very much struggle with those competing emotions. A little over a month ago, Cantor Singer and I had to officiate at the worst part of our job, which, thank God, does not happen very often. But when it does, it reminds us it is the worst part of our job. It was a young girl. She was 20 years old. She was in college, and she died in a very freak and sudden accident, and it was horrific. There's just nothing worse. We had her funeral right here at this temple. And Cantor and I were sitting right on that chair next to each other, and friend after friend after friend came forward in quivering voice, fighting back tears, talking about their dearest who was ripped from them in their lives, and how they were going to go on as friends, as a family, as a community. It shook all of us. And as clergy people, it honestly takes a good 2 or 3 months to recover from those things. They sit with you for a long time. If they don't, there's something wrong. And I would argue it's the same thing for doctors. It's the same thing for others who are close to those moments. We don't feel that same way when people live 95 strong years and are blessed to have family and generations around them. That is a celebration of life. But these tragedies, they are so hard to digest. And then something happened to me while one of the friends was speaking. And I leaned over to Cantor Singer. Of course, he's from Israel. And I said, "This is indeed a tragedy. This is absolutely horrific. But this is happening every week in Israel. Every week in Israel, there are 20 to 30-year-old kids that are being buried, whose lives are being ripped away from them. And their friends and loved ones are coming to pay tribute to them. And the aftershocks and reverberations of that horrific event is felt midor lador, from generation to generation, for time immemorial. It doesn't let up at all. So what do we do here when this happens? What do we do when we say, how does this one feeling that is so real, how is that legitimated in a world where we are distanced where it's happening in regularity, or distanced because of where and why it is happening? And it becomes really tricky. I remember when my son Elias was born. It was a really happy and exciting time in our lives. We were just moving here. He was born in May. And we just bought our first home. We just bought our first cars in like 15 years. And it was a new beginning for us. But I was scared about one thing. See, Elias has an older sister by almost 3 years named Eve. And no one prepares you when you have your first child for how much love you will feel for that child. You know you will love that child. You know you are excited for it, but there's no book, there's no handbook that tells you how much you're going to love them and how deeply you will fall in love with them. And what I was scared about when Elias was born was, how would it be possible for me to love another thing that much? And would my heart hold enough love that I could love Eve the same amount or continue to grow, but also have that love for Elias? Elias is almost 19 years old, so it's not hard for me today to think, of course that's how it happened. I just grew in love. And the heart is an amazing thing, both the physical heart and the emotional heart, but it creates these new chambers that allows us the space to grow and to love. So why is it that we feel this sense of empathy that is limited on the chambers that it has? Why can't we have the empathy that we all have and should have for the abduction of Nancy Guthrie, but also have the same level of empathy and understanding and compassion when it comes to Jews, Israelis who were taken from their home and abducted and held in tunnels and not given food to eat, not allowed to see their loved ones, not allowed to see their grandchildren, not allowed to live in their homeland? Why is that different? Much of what we aim to strive for in Judaism is right versus wrong and good versus bad. That's what drives us. Dory and I recently went to go hear a lecture at the 92nd Street Y, and Deborah Lipstadt was speaking, the former ambassador and envoy against anti-Semitism under the Biden administration, also a professor at Emory University, and the author of the book Denial that fought those who looked to deny the legitimacy of the Holocaust. And she had a brilliant line that was obvious, but sometimes even the most obvious can slap us across the face. She said, "When I was a young girl and I lived in New York City, my mother took me to march for civil rights in Harlem. And she didn't take me to march for civil rights in Harlem because she was looking to curry favor with the black community. She took me to march in Harlem because it was the right thing to do. She wasn't looking to do it because no one had done it for her, but she had to do it just to prove something. She said the moral code that shaped her mother's life, which ended up shaping her life, was one that said, when there is wrong and there is right, we err to the side of right and we follow it." And then she said, for Goodman and Schwerner, who lived just around the block from her, when they went down to Mississippi for voter rights with John Cheney, who was a black American, they didn't do it to curry favor. They weren't doing it for political gain. They weren't doing it to promote some one-angled or sided agenda. Schwerner and Goodman went down to Mississippi because it was the right thing to do. That's what drove them. They didn't do it because they had an allegiance to a particular group or a particular person. They saw something wrong happening in the world, and they wanted to do their part to make it right. So why is it when we see something wrong in the world, we sometimes put on these yellow pins, but when the exact same wrong could be happening elsewhere, there's quiet? Why is it that kids can protest the deaths of children in Gaza, and they can protest that on university campuses from Cornell to Columbia to Berkeley? But when kids are killed in Ukraine, or kids are killed in Iran by oppressive regimes, there is silence. And how can it not in you create what it does create in me, which is a sense of envy, empathy envy, victimhood envy, frustration on that front? What I have come to learn is that when it comes to right versus wrong and good versus bad, we should always be in that pursuit. But just like our legal system, we have to be blind to it. It cannot depend who did it and why. It's not a justification. It never is an excuse. We all know that. But what we equally know is that empathy doesn't need to be a competitive sport. And just like our hearts are able to find space for love that can multiply and grow, so too can our hearts find space for empathy. Empathy for Nancy Guthrie, along with empathy for those who were abducted and taken to Gaza, whether they were held for 3 weeks or they were held for almost 3 years. We can find empathy. Empathy for those who lost their life through tragic accident at a young age, and empathy for those who had their lives taken away by those who foment hate. Because in the end, a parent's tears taste the same. And the salt of the tears of that family that the cantor and I officiated at a few weeks ago here are no more or less salty than the tears of Rachel Goldberg Poland or hundreds of other mothers and fathers who lost their child. If indeed our chambers of our hearts can grow to increase love, so too can it grow to increase empathy. And while I don't want these ribbons taken off for Nancy Guthrie. What I do want are the people in the community of the world to have the strength and the temerity to be able to wear them if God forbid, or when God forbid, there is that next kind of abduction. Whether it's against a Jew, or whether it's against an African American, or whether it's against a Muslim, or whether it's against a Ukrainian, we have that space in our hearts. And until we can start to even that playing field without that justification, I think we are not able to find the healing that gives us the hope for tomorrow. On this Shabbat, I pray for three things. I pray for the safe return of Nancy Guthrie so that her family can heal. I pray for the consolation of the family that laid their loved one to rest from this shul, and the consolation of all of those who lost people who were near and dear to them on October 7th and beyond. And equally, the third thing I pray for our hearts to expand in that level of sympathy and empathy, to make it less competitive by nature, so that all of our hearts can open up and make space for those who hurt and grieve, and those that we wear symbols for are not contingent on political party, affiliation, or nationhood. May that come to be. May we see the humanity in all of God's creations. Amen and Shabbat Shalom.